Hey guys, there's something that's been weighing on my heart recently, and today especially, I wanted to have this conversation. A few weeks ago, we talked about the importance of free play in our lives, and I mentioned at that time I was going to do some more research, and we would come back and have a later discussion about it. And we're going to do that now. I think it's a very critical topic, especially during this time that we're in with COVID-19, and the fact that there is such a struggle now over feeling any sense of control, and it really has brought to light our society's desire to have control, or at least, as I mentioned before, to have a feeling of control, because ultimately we don't have control over a lot of things in our lives. And so someone is in my line of work, I see a lot of really frustrating situations, and I'm also really grateful in my own life. I lead a really non-traditional lifestyle. Someone who has pursued God's calling for me to be single and spend more time in missions and service in my career and serving the population. And, that alone is to being someone who's self-employed, who can travel freely, can really dictate my own schedule, and just have a lot of flexibility in my life, which is so against the societal norm. And as I have grown older and learned more and gained more insight, and truly been enlightened, I have understood that so many people are just being funneled down this narrow path that the world has created for us, this perception that we have about who we are supposed to be and the route that we're supposed to take. And thankfully, I have had the insight and the courage to step outside of the box and say that there's more than one way to approach things, and that you don't have to just follow the societal norms. But unfortunately, I feel like I'm kind of in an anomaly when it comes to that. In fact, to the point where sometimes I feel guilt over myself having gained that insight and that freedom, and having experienced the liberation of understanding that I don't have to conform to society and do things an exact way, that I can be expressive and creative and I can break the mold. And I think what I see now, being sort of on this side of it, is this really disheartening, concerning situation that we are doing a major disservice to our younger generations, especially as adults, by failing to prepare them for the future and to adequately equip them, but instead acting selfishly out of our own egos and our own desires for control. And I really want to explore that. We're going to unpack that today and talk about where we're going wrong and the potential consequences, why we're being selfish, and kind of what I'm seeing through my work, and then the changes that we need to make to overcome this, because the route that we're headed down right now is disastrous as it pertains to our future leadership and the characteristics that we're establishing in our younger generations. And unfortunately, there's already a deficit. There's a major deficit because we're a couple generations behind when it comes to this. But, I just finished reading a book that was recommended to me by Peter Gray, and it's called Free to Learn. And first of all, so I want to start off by saying, when I use the term free play, I'm not just referring to what it may sound like play, entertainment, or fun, okay? Free play is simply saying that we have the opportunity to express ourselves, be imaginative, creative, to think outside the box, to break social norms, and to divert from the way things are typically done, okay? Free play is just grounds for exploring, basically, and breaking the mold. And yes, play in general is very important. We're going to look at all these other concepts as it relates, And as I read this book, I was already aware that through my work, I see so many situations where young people are robbed of opportunities to learn and grow because of poor decisions by adults. And the book really just opened my eyes to how bad this problem is. and really kind of unfortunately a disservice that a lot of our modern day school systems are doing, like for some learning styles of students. And so let's kind of go through that, because when you think about it, what are some of the things in life that we as humanity desire the most, right? And when I consider that a feeling or sense of control, freedom, expression, and a sense of autonomy, right? Independence, that we're unique and we can be uniquely ourselves. Unfortunately, that those things are met with a lot of contesting. So our society does not foster that. It gives us this very like linear, narrow approach to go down. It says that, unfortunately, there's this very rigid idea of that this is the way that we've always done things, and so we're going to continue to do it this way. And if you try to divert, then you're going to be met with a lot of challenges. And so people back off, and that's what leads people down the road to miserable jobs and existences and really being unhappy and unfulfilled. I want to talk about some of the examples that I see in my work with young people who are being, in my opinion, cheated of opportunities to learn. Oftentimes because of adult selfishness, laziness, or just kind of neglect of responsibility. And, in general, society tells us what to do, and it usually tells us exactly how to do it, right? And we're given this template, and it's easy to just go that path, but it's also often unfulfilling, right? It leads to the problem is it leads to so much untapped potential, creativity. It doesn't allow us to really be who we truly are, and so we're essentially it's unfulfilling, or I don't remember exactly the word I'm looking for, but we're like you get to the end of the road and you realize that you have gone down a long journey, but you haven't gotten to your destination because you never sought to be who you truly were supposed to be, because there was so much that was undiscovered or unexplored. So for instance, like it's just some things in general. As we grow up, we're taught that we're supposed to have different developmental stages. We get to school, we're taught that we're supposed to learn a certain way. It used to be using textbooks. Now it's Chromebooks that we learn in a certain stages. And then we do homework. We're assigned. We're supposed to do it a certain way. We have to explain why it is that it needs to be done that way. And if we want to take a different approach, often that is not accepted. And then as we grow up, then we're given this expectation that in order to be successful, that we have to go on to college or university, and often now community college isn't acceptable because that's falling short of that. And now the rankings have been set higher and higher, and if you don't get a graduate degree, then you're not meeting the bar. And all of that, again, that is a societal expectation. And then you get into the workforce, and it's anticipated that you work a 40-hour week, and 9 to 5 doesn't really exist anymore. But there's that expectation, you'll work 5 days a week, 40 hours, and now it's a lot more than that. And as I've become self-employed, I've realized that, I can decide to work as many hours as I want to work based upon what I want to get out of my work, right? How rewarding I want it to be financially, what I want to be able to achieve. What's most important to me, is it having freedom of time? Is it serving as many clients as possible, or maximizing the work I do with a smaller amount of clients? And so I've been liberated to that and enlightened to that fact. It's like, well, for all this time, we've been led to believe that what's wrong with taking a 3-day weekend, and so there's all these things now. It's like, wow, we've been deceived all this time. And some people will for their entire lives. And so then they work tirelessly in jobs that they've been funneled into, that other people told them that they should be in because they were good at this, or they would never amount to anything in this, even though that was their interest. And then they're miserable. So then what do? We eagerly anticipate retirement in the thought that that's when true happiness is going to come, because we're going to have freedom and opportunities to do things. And we wait until then, we don't have our health. And it's just this whole progressive state of societal perceptions that are drawn out, right? And so now what's happening is, kids are very perceptive and they see that and they begin to develop those same ideas. And they also, whenever they try to think outside the box or be expressive, they're usually met with challenge, or they're challenged. And so they tend to back off of that and then just, again, conform. And what is again happening there? We're having a society of miserable, unsatisfied people who are perhaps externally achieving things and maybe have financial success, but they're left void inside, right? So, how are we deserving young people? And some of the things that I see, and I think that what's happening right now too, and it's alarming as we see during COVID, is there apparently are so many people who are struggling and are barely getting by and are needing all of these resources for daily meals and survival needs. And it concerns me because the thought is, how have we gotten to this point? Are we a society that is lacking such in resourcefulness and resilience that we don't have the means to be able to survive and supply ourselves with even the most basic needs during this time of adversity, right? I mean, our country has been in far worse predicaments and persevered. And the people that came out of those challenges, they had far fewer resources, and they found a way to obtain what they needed and to push through those challenges. And now what I see, unfortunately, is that our willpower is poor because we don't exercise that muscle anymore. We're very non-resilient, and we're not resourceful at all. We have fostered a society through generations now that is it's learned to become dependent and entitled. And so the whole thought is that all my needs are always going to be met by someone else. Unfortunately, this is sort of a culture of poverty. There's this cultural idea that I grew up with government assistance or people always taking care of my family, and those values and thought processes are passed down, and we're not teaching people to be resourceful and resilient. We're teaching them to be reliant and dependent upon, and that now all of a sudden we're in this crisis because we're scrambling to supply needs for all of those people, and so how have we gotten here? Because I think part of the problem is we quit teaching people how to develop certain skill sets, how to fend for themselves, because we started focusing more on ourselves. Like, let's look at some examples, because what I see is a lot of young people who want to be autonomous. I believe that kids really want to learn and develop skills, but their means of communicating that or their requests for those desires often go either misunderstood or dismissed, or those requests are not met. And instead, because what happens is for instance, like I know a lot of kids who want to help out in the kitchen and learn to cook. And I am so excited about that because that is an incredible skill. I'm finding now, I watch I've noticed as I work on the patio that some of my neighbors, there's a younger couple especially, they leave every meal to go pick up to-go orders and come back 3 times a day. I am convinced at this point they have not cooked a single meal during this entire pandemic. And that saddens me, because what that tells me is that they don't have the skills to cook. And those are basic skills that everyone should have. Generations past have failed to pass down these skill sets, and we're continuing to do so. So we have kids now, I have clients who would love to learn how to cook and how to navigate the kitchen and help the adults prepare meals. And it's not happening for a couple of reasons. Either, number one, the adults don't know how to cook because previous generations have failed them, or secondly, they have other concerns. Either It would be a hassle to the adults to allow kids to cook or help out because they will probably make a mess. And you know what? You should see my kitchen. I love to cook. It's pretty messy. I come out of there having learned a lot of creative ideas, and some excellent meals. Comes with a cost. You're right. Kid's probably going to make a mess. It's a trade-off. The other concern is, and this is one other thing that's holding society back and parents and adults from allowing kids to express in free play, and this is huge, is fear. Okay, we fear for kids' safety, so we don't let them explore at all. I think like what we used to be able to do. Now it's like a kid can't ride a bike, can't climb a tree. I know parents who, they won't allow a kid to climb a tree. They won't allow them to play on a playground, jump on a trampoline because, it's potentially risky and they might get injured. And they might. That's the honest truth. But what's happening instead? That kid, and I truly believe now through my work, having seen and heard so many kids talk about the power of using a trampoline and the impact that has on their not just physical health, but their mental and emotional health. I really believe that there's a sensory need in most kids, a primal need to jump and to get that stimulation from using a trampoline, and it fulfills that. What's happening now is that kids have gotten injured, and here's part of the problem. We hear about the injuries through the media, okay? We don't hear about all the many, many cases of safe outcomes and healthy outcomes from a kid using a trampoline. We hear about the injuries, or we had perhaps a trip to the ER in the past. So what happens? We completely eliminate and wipe out that is an option. So, it could be they had a bike wreck, they had to get stitches, they got injured on the trampoline. The fishing hooks are not safe, we don't go fishing. And all of a sudden what happens is we create this bubble around our kids. In the kitchen, it could get injured, right? We have to monitor them. It's not saying free play is not an all-out risk-taking thing, right? There's still supervision involved. But what's happening is that a kid who desires to help in the kitchen, as adults, we have all these excuses not to let it happen. So then it doesn't happen. So ultimately, okay, so what have we gained? All right, well, we've ensured that a young person doesn't suffer an injury in the kitchen, doesn't cut themselves, okay? I cut myself cutting an onion earlier, okay? It's pretty well healed already. I'm fine. So yes, there are minor risks. So we avert any potential kitchen injury, all right? We avoid a mess that we'll have to clean up if a kid helps out. So what's happening in the long run? So we're depriving a young person from learning how to cook. Okay, acute situations are averted. Let's look at the long-term consequences. They grow up not knowing how to cook. So then what do? They fall back on convenience. They rely on fast food. They develop chronic illnesses, okay? They pass that down to their kid because they don't know how to cook, so then the next generation's not going to learn it. Those habits are passed along, and that needs to be understood. The failure to stop and take the time and energy to teach a kid how to do something, such as work in the kitchen and use different utensils and use not even a recipe. I don't use recipes. To be just creative and express themselves, right? Show them how to prepare a meal. Taking the time to do that is going to pass down for generations, right? Or at least through their life. Otherwise, like I said, if they don't have that skill, then they rely upon convenience, which means they're probably not going to eat as healthily, and they're going to eat fast food. And then you're facing a potential chronic health crisis or obesity or a number of things down the road. We don't think about that. We have to think about the long-term consequences of when we say no to a kid when it comes to teaching them something that they want to learn, that oftentimes is a realistic expectation. That's something I see too, is that kids make a lot of modest, realistic requests that when I hear as an outsider, I think, that's not anything like excessive. And here's another thing to consider. I think we need to look at this, and when a kid makes a request, whether it be for time and energy, whether it be for material items. Maybe it is for material items, right? But when that request is made, ask yourself, really, what is the harm? What is the real potential bother? Like just simple things like kids asking for, can I get a piece of fruit out of the fridge? And then it's like, no, because it's all the way in the back and you might not get things out of order, like when you put it back or when you go to get it. And I think, like, what's the big deal? Like, what if some things get out of order? Okay, I'm excited. It's how are you looking at it too? I'm excited a kid wants to eat a piece of fruit. We're more worried about that we might have to rearrange some things in the fridge. So what happens then? So potentially what happens is the kid goes to the pantry and gets the cookies that are on the front because they don't want to be at a disservice or an inconvenience to the adult and, throw things out in disarray. So they eat a cookie over a piece of fruit. So what have you taught them? Again, convenience. Like, we've got to understand what the hidden messages that we're sending. Okay, let's look at some other things. So that was one example because I see that a lot. I love to cook, and I hear clients, young kids, come in, tell me when I say, "What are some things you want to learn?" I hear a lot. I want to learn how to cook. Are the adults telling me, well, they don't want to take the time to do it, or A, B, or C excuses could make a mess, could be unsafe. We don't have the ingredients, like, or I say, adults. Here's the thing, like, allow a kid to include an item or two on the grocery shopping list. I love the fact, like, we complain that kids want to eat the same things over and over again. How much ability to explore are we giving them? Let a kid pick a new creative fruit or vegetable every time you go to the store. Let them explore foods that they've never heard of. I've done that with clients before. We have the sibling set of clients, or my clients who don't have a lot of resources. Okay, they're getting provided with a lot of poor quality food that's coming from, charitable resources. And those things are awesome, but I also want to introduce them to healthier alternatives. So we bring in fruits that we've never tried before, and they love that. They love learning, but parents won't divert from the typical plan to allow kids to explore. That's just another way to involve free play, right? With food in this case. It's saying, we're going to try new things. It's like you go to the store, you have your list, you eat the same thing over and over. Adults are so guilty of this. As adults, we need to be willing to break from our mold and say, we're going to show kids it's okay to try new things by going off course with the grocery list. And if we don't like it, so what? We don't like it, we don't buy it again, right? I mean, do you just never try new things but out of fear that it might not work out? Well, prepare to lead a pretty miserable and boring life. So, this is another thing. I see a lot of times the adults dismissing a child's request because it could be a hassle. Like I said, it could be unsafe or simply like an inconvenience to the adults. So ultimately, our selfishness with our time. There's one thing I hear a lot. Kids get really frustrated with adults because we spend so much time on our devices, and kids will say, "I just don't feel like my parents ever listen to me because whenever I try to talk to them or whenever I ask them a question, they won't look up from their phone or they're always on their phone." And then this is another thing. So the same parents expect they get frustrated and expect the kid not to be on their devices all the time. Or they're like, well, I don't understand. All they ever want to do is be on their device. Well, what behaviors are you modeling? Right? And what messages are being sent? Again, I can't stress enough. Young people are so perceptive. When they have something to ask and it's of importance to them, and that's so many asides, but here's another thing. Adults often dismiss things because they're not important to the adult, or that it's minuscule or laughable to the adult, but it could be very serious to a young person. And we have to honor that. We need to honor that. Just because it doesn't matter to us does not mean it doesn't matter to a kid, right? So we need to get on their level and say, this seems really important to you. What can I do to help you address that? Instead of just being like, that's not important right now. I'm just going to continue to scroll through Facebook. Okay? What are you telling the kid? You're telling them that what you have to say or your concerns and your thoughts are not as important as the latest gossip on Facebook. And that's sending a poor message, right? Because then what's going to happen as they grow up? They're going to be terrible advocates for themselves. Well, there's a couple things. Either they're going to give up eventually and they're going to figure out that their voice is not important enough to be heard. All throughout life, they're just going to go a narrow path, conform. They're not going to speak up. They're going to possibly work their tails off, but be too insecure to ask for a raise or promotion or review because they've never been heard. The requests have not been heard or followed through with before. Or they're going to say, you know what? I've tried to ask politely over and over, but I didn't get the response I wanted. So now you're going to hear me roar. And that happens a lot too. I get parents that bring their kids in and say, fix my kid. He or she has become a behavioral issue and they just want to control everything. All right. So let's look at this. Let's consider this. Why does a young person want to take control over major things in the home? And they get to a point where they are demanding and disrespectful and bossy. How about the fact that for many of these young people, they have been requesting control and decision-making power over small things for a very long time. And a lot of times it's subtle, okay? Young people have a unique way of communicating their needs and desires. And they oftentimes will ask for very small things, a little bit of an adult's time. Here's some things I've seen requests from kids that have been dismissed or ignored or challenged even. The request to listen to a song that was really meaningful to them. The request to, like I said, maybe pick something to have for dinner or be a decision maker in the grocery shopping list. The request to be involved in building a schedule for the family or the home, or the request to also be involved in a discussion about like consequences in the home. There's so many examples here, and as I look at my list and I think about that, all of those requests for small doses of control, which if you stop and ask yourself, what would be the harm in that, is little to none most of the time. But adults dismiss children's small attempts to have control, and then what ultimately happens? The child gets super frustrated and says, all right, I am tired of asking. Now I'm going to take it to the next level. And that's when they become demanding and disrespectful. And then it's essentially saying, all right, I've tried to ask nicely over and over. Do you hear me now? And so then the adult says, well, yeah, I hear you. And what happens? Essentially, a child who has tried over and over to get their desires or their request met gets to a point where they become so frustrated that it becomes misbehavior. All right, well, in reality, what is that? Oftentimes, that's just persistence and resilience. They're just developing. They're just trying to find ways. They're saying, gosh, this is not working. I am trying to communicate a certain way that this is important to me, that this has value, that I want to have say in this matter. And this adult is not getting it. So I'm going to crank it up a notch. And then what happens? Do you hear me now? Well, the adult says, yeah, what are you doing? This is completely out of line. And then what happens? Discipline. The kids oftentimes shamed for expressing themselves or being resilient, or they're challenged, or they're punished. So then what message does that send? What it essentially can tell them is that, hey, by the way, if you are persistent in getting and trying to get your requests or your demands met, and you're resilient and persistent, that it's not okay and you should be ashamed, and it's going to come with consequences, right? And that you need to back down. And so as they grow older and there are things that they're really passionate about or believe in, or that they want to be able to change or impact, they're going to stop and say, well, this is really important to me, but I have tried to submit my request and no one's listened. And last time that I really spoke up for myself, I was punished and shamed. So I'm just going to back down, and I'll be miserable and unfulfilled and frustrated and feel like I don't matter, my opinion doesn't matter. But I would rather do that than be punished, because as a child, I was taught that persistence and resilience to get your point across is not okay. And so that's unfortunately the message that a lot of parents are sending to their children these days. And so we're parents are not wanting to give children the ability to make some often minuscule choices in the day to day in order to empower them. What's happening is so as adults, we have this desire for control, because I truly believe that most of us are highly insecure. And so what happens is we feel, I believe that also we feel this sense of not having control. But when we have kids or young people, there's an ability there to control them and control all these things around them. And that doesn't just mean controlling what they do, but also even the safety factor. The fact that we can control them from getting hurt, them from taking risk, right? So we say, well, I'm going to put this bubble around this child and not allow them to do anything. And what happens is often those are good intentions with disastrous outcomes. Because what happens, yes, in the moment, it protects them, but it does not serve them well for the long term, all right? And what also happens there too is, as adults, when we feed our need to feel control, it boosts our ego. Our ego craves that. And it's like, we don't want to give up any feeling of control. So when a child says, hey, can I make the decision about this? What often happens as adults is we say, nope, I got it. I got this. You go back and play. Go back to your room. Go back to your Xbox. This concerns me too, as I hear a lot of parents who, when a child wants to be involved in something, the parent is dismissive. And I hear it said, go back to your video game. And here, so let's move along to another point. Some other requests I hear from kids that are dismissed, that quite frankly concerns me, are that a kid wants to ride a bike, but in order for that to happen, the adult would have to get the bike off the rack, maybe fix the tire. Okay, so then what happens? The adult says, well, no, not right now. And here's another one. When you say not right now to a kid, first of all, they're hearing no. So it's important to say, give them an expectation. But if you say not right now and you tell them a later time, or even if you're saying not right now, they're going to hold you to it. And so don't be upset later when that kid comes back and says, hey, remember when I asked you if I could ride my bike? You said not right now. Well, it's a week later. So it's not right then. It's now. It's a different time. And then you say, again, not right now. All you're doing is deferring over and over. So if the kid is persistent, they're going to keep coming back and asking. And don't you dare, as an adult, get frustrated at that, because that is persistence and that's accountability. So if you really don't want to, if you're never going to get their bike down off the rack and fix the tire so they can ride it, you just need to say that and own up to it. But here's another thing. So I hear adults say they don't want to get a bike down so a kid can ride a bike, or they don't want to take, like kids want to go fishing. Well, they don't want to take a kid fishing because then they would have to string the pole, they would have to drive, they would have to go set with them. The adult doesn't want to do that. It's going to take effort on the adult's part, right? So then that's dismissed. Kids just wanting to go outside in general sometimes are dismissed because their requests are dismissed because the parents are afraid of all the potential safety risks. Unfortunately, yes, there are predators in society now. But like I said earlier, the media only tells us about all of those negative situations, all of those victims, right? They don't tell us about all the incredible positive outcomes from kids being outside, exposed to sunlight, and being active and moving. They're and here's the thing too. What's talked about in the news is all of these acute, I keep using that word because I'm saying that's like the buzzword for danger in the now, right? So the news talks about the kid who's abducted or severely injured in a situation. The news is not talking about the fact that the kid who stay, or the millions of kids who are staying inside most of the time now and not going outdoors because of either adults fearing their safety or a number of other things. They're not talking about the fact that those kids are at a huge safety risk of becoming obese and developing chronic illness, if not a lack of sunlight exposure, all these different things, right? They are at a health risk too. It's a long-term thing, right? So there's a risk involved either way. You have to weigh the reward risk cost. And I can tell you this, as someone who got to go outside every day as a kid and explore freely and take risk, and who wrecked my bike, and who was a little bit, what's the word, like thrill-seeking, as boys should be. That's the whole thing too. Boys need to be boys, and let boys be boys, or girls too. There is an innate primal need to do some of these childhood behaviors and get out in nature and explore. Trying to hold those in, confine them, it's going to come out one way or the other, okay? So let's get to that as well. I've seen young people persistently ask about being able to be a part of a sports league. And again, the times that I've seen this, the parent didn't say no. They put up a myriad of excuses, or it said, I'll see about it. I'll check into it. Yes, I'll get you signed up, or we don't have the equipment. It was a laundry list of excuses. So the kid holds out hope that, they're going to be able to be involved still in the sport. They ask over and over, persistent, and ultimately it never happens. Like, the season comes and goes. So again, a couple things. They learn that it doesn't matter how persistent or resilient you are, that your voice doesn't matter. And they also, if you, let's take that situation for instance. If you're that parent who just kind of hangs it out there in front of the kid and says, yeah, we'll get there, X, Y, and Z excuse, but I'm not telling you no. That kid, first of all, is going to hold you to it, and then they're also going to start to eventually realize that you're not trustworthy. You want kids that trust adults. It goes both ways. Adults have to earn kids' trust. So, like I said, kids are perceptive, and they realize after a while, it's like, I have asked over and over, and this adult has said this every time, and when I come back to hold them to it, they have fallen through. And so they're going to get to a point where on really big, important matters, they're not going to trust the adult, and it's going to be really consequential. Okay, so we need to be careful about the responses that we're giving. Okay, it's only fair for everyone, not just kids, but in society, that we understand clearly what our expectations are. All right, now I don't want to get back to social norms, but what I'm saying is that for instance, in a home, a lot of times I'll hear parents just tell a kid that they can have what they've requested when they learn how to behave, or when they can act good or behave better. A very vague expectation. So my role often is to intervene and say, well, what does that look like? In all fairness, what is your measurement of good behavior? Because it's not fair to the kid to have this bar that they're supposed to meet that they have no clear measurement of. They don't even know what the requirements are. They're just aimlessly wandering in the dark. And I liken that to say, what if your boss came to you, liking the social norms, but the boss comes to you and says that, well, a couple ways. Hey, there's a huge raise in store for you if you can be a better worker, or if you can do a better job, then these are going to be outcomes. Or, you've really been struggling lately, and unless you pick it up around here and do a better job, we're going to have to terminate you. Well, okay, if that's all you heard, that would be kind of disheartening and super frustrating, because then you're like, what are the measuring points? So that's the same for kids. Adults need to stop being vague and start being more clear. And here's the thing. If you don't have the exact answer, say that. Tell the kid that. Say, you know what? I'm going to be completely honest with you, I'm not really sure right now. You're asking me about this. I would love to tell you clearly yes or no. I would love to promise you that. But unfortunately, I'm not sure because of these things. And if it's something you can disclose and a kid's going to understand, have a conversation with them about it. Okay? Because kids, regardless of how you deliver it, they are going to hear no, but they would rather hear no with and then gain an understanding that it's not because you don't want them to have or be able to do that, but it's because there are barriers that maybe are even outside of your control, right? And you can demonstrate empathy in that as well. Let me kind of look through here what else we have. But the fear there is that when we as adults act like this, we're giving the child this sense of helplessness and teaching them that they don't have control over life outcomes, right? And so what does that create? Someone who's very dependent, someone who's easily manipulated, and who will likely not be fulfilled in a lot of their life's journey, all right? And then, the problem too is that when kids don't have these requests met, they become a behavioral challenge. And so let me kind of break down what's happening. So, like, let's say, I want to hear all the time, like kids want to jump on a trampoline, or they want to go outside and run around. This is a good segue. They want to spend time outside, running around, exerting energy, jumping, riding a bike, any kind of one of those things, like, or on a playground. Or even like in the dirt. I mean, we don't let kids play in the dirt anymore because, they might get their hands dirty. Like, this is a whole other conversation, but that's why they have poor immunity now, okay? When I was a kid, we played in the dirt, and you know what? I made it. So, like, we've got to divorce ourselves from that concept. But here's the thing. Kids needing to go out and move around. When that is not allowed, then what's essentially happening is the kid's primal need to get out and get sunlight exposure and move around is not being met, okay? So when that's not being fulfilled, something's going to come out of it. So what happens is the kid channels that energy in other ways, which is often aggressive, disruptive behavior, all right? And so then the adult's attention is gotten, and that's when consequences are given. And sometimes they come, to the clinic, and then all of a sudden I've got this child, the adult saying that my child's got a behavioral issue, or the worst is when the child's labeled as a behavioral issue. My child is a behavioral problem. And I think they need to be diagnosed with something, or they have ADHD, okay? Let me just tell you that if your child is asking repeatedly, maybe not so clearly or it's subtle, but to go outside, run around, jump around, go places, explore, and do things, and those needs are not being met, or they're told to just go watch TV or play their video game instead, or stay inside, and to sort of put a cap on their energy. If that's the case, then you're going to experience the primal need in the form of disruptive behavior. You can't you can't just expect a child not to express their energy, all right? And there is, like I said, a primal need. So just because a child has excess energy doesn't mean they have ADHD, okay? It is normal for us to have that. It's not normal for us to not be able to exert it. So keeping a child inside and depriving them of the ability to move around, to jump and be active and take risk and potentially, yes, get injured, is robbing them of a natural need. That leads oftentimes to disruptive behaviors, which then is a stigma on the child, and then there's a diagnosis and all that, and that's not something we want to do, right? Then what happens? Then you're telling the child that, it's not okay for you to express your basic needs, and to be able to, like, actually just run around and do what you need to do. It's like the same in the same sentence, I hear like, well, I don't understand why my child has so much excess energy and can never stop running around the house. But on the same account, the child has an endless source of Mountain Dew, and the only way to channel his energy is through highly stimulating video games that involve constant dopamine hit from killing people in the game or getting those dopamine achievements. So again, like, we need to stop and think about this. Like, okay, are we even allowing the child to have their needs met? Or are we depriving them? Or is the adult partially responsible for the child's behaviors because we have locked them down to the point of they're trying to break out of sort of this internal prison, and it just becomes disruptive behaviors. They're labeled, and it's disastrous. And that's in the current. Like, where does that lead for the years and the decades to come in their lives, right? So we have to think about the potential consequences of that. There's, I think, so many times when small things are very meaningful to kids, and we don't see that. I am very thankful to sort of be in an outsider's role and get this external view of situations and these interactions between kids and adults and parents, where I can notice. I like to say it like I'm an advocate for kids, and I sort of like try to understand their communication, but I will notice that something is very important to a kid. They may tell me directly their frustration with their parents, but I may just see it in their expression, and the parent completely ignores that, and they're not getting the point. And what happens is, so often it would be very, very simple. It's a modest, decent request by the kid, and it's just hammered down. Like, it's just completely stiff-armed. And that's demoralizing. Not only is it depriving the kid of getting what they ask for, but it's disheartening, and it's like, it's again stomping on their ability to self-advocate and really believe that they have control over outcomes. And a lot of times these are things that have little to no potential negative outcomes. So again, I ask you, when the situation arises and the kid makes a request, what is the harm? What is the potential harm? Oftentimes it's little to nothing. Maybe at a minimum, it's an inconvenience to the adult. And shame on us for, as adults, if we are always putting ourselves first, because it would be slight inconvenience for us to do something to allow the kid a learning opportunity or a chance to build upon their physical health, or to get out and explore and be creative and express themselves, all things that they so desperately need, okay? And I think what we're missing too is that a kid's persistence and resilience to be able to meet their needs and to become independent and to grow is far more important than for us to buy things to meet their impulsive desires, okay? And it might be easier as adults to throw money at kids or to give them material things they want to occupy their time. Sadly, technology has become a babysitter in a lot of ways, or a substitute parent. And that's going to have a lot of detrimental consequences as well. And a lot of times too, when kids make a request, what do they hear? Well, life is not fair, or you don't always get what you want. And yes, that is true. That is true. But telling your kid this over and over is disempowering them. And it is essentially saying that, just because you want something, you can't have it. So how about instead we actually give him something valuable and say, if that's really important to you, let's talk about how you can get there. Let's talk about how you can earn or achieve this. Because I will tell you this, I have seen some pretty amazing young people who want something badly enough. In fact, sometimes in light of the adult not supplying it, that they get so frustrated that they go and they say, you know what, I'm moving on without the adult. I'm going to find a way. And they go out and march out on their own and get a job, or find, even if they're too young to work in an established place, they'll find ways to be resourceful and make money. And they save up, and then all of a sudden what happens? You better be careful too. Watch yourself to make sure you're not that adult that says, you know what, well, when you get a job and make your own money, you can have that. Because your kid may show up with what he wanted because he said, well, I did what you said. But I think we always do these things, and what good is telling a kid, money doesn't grow on trees? Well, what good? Great sarcasm. What is that teaching them? How about we teach them instead? Okay, well, if you value these things and you really want this, let's talk about how you can get there. All right, because money doesn't grow on trees, but through hard work, perseverance, determination, goal setting, like, you can get a lot of things you want. But these dumb cliches that we want to feed them over and over to hold them off or get them off our backs is not empowering them. It's telling them over and over, like, you get what you're given and the world gives you, and life happens to you, not for you, and it's not in your favor, and you just need to deal with it. Okay, well, what a disservice you have done to your kids, all right, by giving them this very narrow-minded approach and feeling of helplessness and lack of control. And the concern there too, as I see, is that there are far too many people who are living out someone else's dreams and expectations for them. And I think this starts at a young age with kids who feel like they have to go to college, and if they don't go, this is one even in athletics, it's very dangerous because, let's even back it up. My fear too is that because adults have a desire to be in control of so many things, there are a lot of kids who I believe don't want to be involved in organized sports, or their interests are outside of something that the parent has involved them in. But the parent did that because that's where they believe the kid needs to be, and they didn't offer the opportunity for free play and expression. They funneled the kid down the route that they wanted them to go and didn't give the kid room to explore what was truly important to them. And then say the parent has this true desire for their ego to be boosted because they want their kid to be a college athlete, and they want to be able to boast about the incredible achievements of their kid. And then all of a sudden it's this competitive thing where the kids, again, like I said, being funneled down this pathway of this is the route we're going to take. And meanwhile, the kids' considerations are never even asked or taken into account. And so then sometimes what we have is this high school athlete who is miserable, maybe not doing something they want to do, or goes to college on a sports scholarship because that's what they were sort of led to believe that they're supposed to do based upon a physical makeup or whatever. And but that's not the road they were supposed to go down. That's just where they were guided. And so again, unfulfilled people, that's what that leads to there. And we're in this society where so many people are living out someone else's expectations for them, some other route that somebody told them that they should take because they're really good at this, or that this is what society does, right? And how many people are actually just choosing their own path? Okay, we've been so disempowered as a society, and it's been passed down from generation to generation. And so instead of now taking the time to stop and have these conversations with our kids about, what is it that's really important to you? What do you value? What do you want to learn about? What can I take the time to teach you to do to be more autonomous, to cook your own meals, to learn how to survive in the outdoors, and to be creative, and to build your physical and mental strength, to teach you how to earn money and be resourceful so you can get the things that are really important to you in the long term. And instead of where we're at now, which is providing the latest shiny object to our kids, instead of instilling important values and giving them the lessons and skills that they need that are going to equip them for the long term and help them for their entire lives, right? To be resourceful, resilient, and persistent in achieving their goals, and to be using free play to be expressive and to explore their natural creativity, and to really tap into who they are as a unique individual, right? And so, how do we get there, right? And so instead of thinking about ourselves, we need to value the time spent teaching kids and not just dictate to them the way, what we expect and the way we expect them to do things, right? And that time is invaluable, right? That is so important. Like those memories together, I mean, even myself, not being a parent, but as a clinician, having the opportunity to see kids learn skills and me not intervene, but me just guiding and giving ideas and suggestions, offering feedback, asking them if they want feedback, and letting them make their own mistakes, but also experiences their own successes, that is incredibly fulfilling. And so I want to encourage you as an adult to not miss out on that opportunity as well. Okay, you're gonna rob yourself of that chance. But it starts with the adults. It starts with us, right? And we have to stop and say, why am I being dismissive? Why am I telling a child to do this or that? And by the way, here's another thing. When you make a request or demand, or you dismiss something with a child, and they say why, when they ask why, don't say because I said so or because I told you so. Okay, that's a lousy excuse. And think about it as an adult. I think it's so important to put ourselves as adults in the place of a child. All right. Well, as you're an adult and you're puzzled as to why an answer was given, and you ask why, and the response you get from another adult is because I said so. Well, how are you going to feel? Probably pretty annoyed, aggravated, and you're probably going to want to punch that person in the throat. Okay. So, and where does that get you? Nowhere. Okay. I'm going to finish this within a moment. We are taught to seek understanding and knowledge and wisdom. And unfortunately, being inquisitive is not really honored anymore. And when kids ask questions, adults are not very good about answering them. Okay. We're either vague or dismissive, or we give smart aleck responses like, because I said so. Okay. Or because I'm the adult. Well, that does not make you special. All right. That doesn't exempt you from being responsible to giving a young person, an answer that is clear for them to understand, that teach them, right? That is our role as adults, to teach these younger people, not just tell them you do something because that's the way it's supposed to be done, right? That is exactly the opposite of what should be done, because that is funneling them down this path of conformity that is going to lead them to be a miserable existence in life, all right? So we as adults have got to start taking control and divorcing ourselves from our ego and our desire to be in control, and to set an example and to make the sacrifices, to take the time to allow young people to be explored, to take risks, to teach them, all right? And just to quit thinking about ourselves, and to quit trying to make kids happy with little monetary fixes or dopamine hits, or telling them to play their video games, or shoving the latest devices in front of their faces. But we need to stop and say, what can I teach my kid today? What healthy risk can I allow this kid to take? Or every time a kid makes a request or asks for something, stop and ask yourself, all right, here's the question. What is the real harm in this? Like, what is the actual harm? And most of the time, it's going to be little to nothing. And you're going to say, well, it's kind of ridiculous that I would turn that down. And you need to stop and weigh the reward, risk, and the outcomes, and say, what stands to be gained from this? So, like I had a kid yesterday ask to have some blueberries, and it's like the adult wanted to dismiss that. And I'm excited the kid wants to eat blueberries. But then, the adult had to consider, like, well, it would be a hassle to get them out of the freezer. And I'm over here thinking, if this kid develops a love for blueberries, he's doing an incredible service to his long-term physical health. So I think we need, as adults, to quit thinking about ourselves and start thinking about the long-term consequences of the lessons and messages that we're sending to our young people, and embrace the value of free play and expression, and understand that we have an innate, primal need to explore our creativity, to be imaginative, to think outside the box, And to do all of these things, to physically move and to get outside and to get this natural stimulation in our lives. Because if we don't, kids are going to express themselves one way or the other. And as adults, you kind of help guide that process. So don't expect them to just deny all of their primal needs and to not be disruptive and let you know that they need to express themselves. Well, let me go to scripture now, because there were a couple things in the Word this morning that I read that also connected with this. And I mentioned something earlier, and I think this speaks to the value of knowledge and wisdom and teaching, guiding, and leading by example, and not also valuing material items or worshiping and putting our stock and fulfillment in material items. So a couple things here that I think will stand out. So it says, apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. All right. So, I talked about kids' desire to learn, and also how much they listen. All right. You may not realize this, but kids are always listening. If you think they don't listen to you, they are paying attention in moments you don't understand, and they're going to hold you accountable to it. So you need to think about the message you're sending and what you're teaching. And so, apply your heart to instruction and your ears to words of knowledge. Do not withhold discipline from a child, it says next. And I agree with that, but we have to make sure we're not disciplining a child for something that they naturally need and they're just trying to express or communicate to the adult. It says also, for the drunkard and the glutton will come to poverty. And, in my eyes, I kind of see that this is saying that if we seek our fulfillment through food, through alcohol, or honestly through any worldly item or material thing, that we're going to come up void. All right, we're going to become empty. And so that's the same for a kid. You can't expect to just give a kid material things and not give them of your time and your knowledge and wisdom, and that they're just going to be good with that, right? There's so much more to it, right? And it says, buy truth and do not sell it, by wisdom, instruction, and understanding. And it talks over and over about in the Bible about the importance of knowledge and wisdom and understanding. Wisdom is so incredibly valuable. What kind of wisdom are you passing down to your kids, to young people? All right. And then it says, my son, give me your heart and let your eyes observe my ways. And let's put ourselves in that position. In that case, it's speaking of God, but as adults, as parents, as guardians, as examples for our young people, okay? We kind of ask too, we want our kids to give their hearts to us, their love and their loyalty, and let your eyes observe my ways. Okay, I want to tell you, kids are watching, all right? So I think be less concerned about how much attention they're paying and more concerned about the example that is being witnessed for them, all right? And, like I said, I cannot express enough the importance of allowing kids to be expressive in free play and to break open those boundaries, to think outside the box, and to not just funnel them down this path of conformity, but give them a chance to explore who they really are, to identify their personal strengths and interests, and to pursue that so they can live a life of autonomy, independence, and creativity, fulfillment, and happiness. And so when they get to the end of that, they can say, I don't have regrets, because I really feel like I was able to explore who I really am, and I was able to develop a career around that and make decisions about things that I wanted to do. And I didn't just grow up thinking that I had to take this specific route, and that they don't just go to college because that's what's expected of them. They don't just play a certain sport because parents wanted them to do that, or go into a certain career because someone in society told them that, or that they had to work a monotonous 40-hour-a-week job, or marry someone they don't want to marry, or at a time they don't want to get married. I see that too, young adults who still desire to be free. They never really explored who they were, and they never were maybe allowed to be a kid or have freedoms as a young adult, because society said, well, you're in an age you should settle down and get married and start having kids. And then what happens? They have an unfulfilled need that they never met, and they dove right into society's expectations, and it's a disaster because that suppressed need is still there. And just because they wanted to blast past it and say, well, okay, it wouldn't be acceptable in society's eyes if I took time to explore who I really am and take some time for myself to be independent, then what happens? Well, then you got to try to backtrack, figure it all out, like get divorced or put the spouse through misery as you meet your own needs. Then you're not prepared to raise kids, and we have this whole disaster. And that's so much of that involves conformity, the expectation of society. We need to break this. We need to break away from this. And so that starts with free play. So please allow your kids, your young people to do that. As adults, please let's look at the example that we are setting and the restrictions and boundaries that we are building around our kids, and really where we are holding them back and doing a disservice. Hey, I appreciate you guys tuning in and being a part of this conversation. Please, I want to hear your feedback. Any questions, let me know. Comments, does this resonate with you? Maybe something that I didn't say that you can chime in as well. But I want to hear from you guys. I'm very passionate about this as someone who works with primarily young people in practice and sees the disconnect between young people and adults and that communication gap and that frustration that kids go through because they're just trying to have some primal need or desire met, and it just keeps getting dismissed, and then they feel like they are super hopeless and have no control, and that is not the path that we want to guide them down. So please be aware of that. We are going to have more conversations like this in the future. A couple more books that I am reading. One of them, I believe, is called The Coddling of the American Mind. Another one is Simplicity Parenting. I will report back about those. Like I said, the book that I did read was called Free to Learn by Peter Gray, and it was excellent. So I encourage you to read that if you're interested in this topic, and that will be empowering to you as well. Hey guys, as always, follow along on Facebook at Forsyth Wellness, or on Instagram at Derek Forsyth, or check out the latest YouTube videos on my YouTube page at Derek Forsyth as well. I'll get some new videos posted up there. I also want to let you know too, these Facebook Live discussions are available on my YouTube page, actually probably much higher quality. If you want to always go back and hit the archives about a certain topic or refer back to something, you can do that on that YouTube page. But again, like I said, if you're not following along, you want to keep up to date on the latest at Forsyth Wellness on Facebook. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.